Welcome to AI FISEC today. We are a podcast that's embarking on a thrilling journey into the intersection of artificial intelligence and physical security. Today, we have our guest, Geva Barash. Geva is going to talk to us about the acceptance and roadblocks of AI facial identification. Super excited to have you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your business, and we'll just jump right into the topic.
Well, good morning, Don. I hope you're
Morning.
doing good. So Secure Our City is a A&E firm that we design everything that has to do with low voltage. We did our path started designing security, but as the world is evolving and everything is IP and everything has a IP address and everything that we do is now tied in together. So in today's world, we're able to tie in between the security, the PA. We do a lot of AV in public safety buildings and schools. So even the mass notification is tied into the security systems. Every day is a new reality in our world with the technology that's evolving. And we keep abreast of all the technology, all the changes, and our job is to design a safer place for all. If we're doing schools for the kids and for public safety, there's a lot of how to improve and how to allow them to better manage emergency situations.
That's awesome. Thank you. And just so the audience knows, right after we finished with the topic, Gabe is going to tell us a few things he'd like to let you know about what he's working on, as well as where to find him next, including GSX in Dallas. So, right, he's going to get his cowboy hat and his boots ready to go for Dallas.
Hey, you're talking to somebody who grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. That's where I went to middle school and high school. So one of the things that I want to do when I get to GSX, and I'm getting there a day early, is to go to Billy Bob and to go to the to try to ride the bull again at Billy Bob's. We'll see how that works out.
I'll place my bets on you. I would have guessed for someone in Massachusetts, right? Because you're still out of Mass.
Born in Israel and grew up in Dallas, Fort Worth. So yeah, I think I was the only cowboy that actually spoke Hebrew back then. And
Okay.
if you're there, I would highly suggest to go visit the Stockyard. That's where Billy Bob is. If you haven't seen that place, it is an amazing place.
You heard it there first, ladies and gentlemen. Stockyard. All right. So, acceptance and roadblocks of AI facial identification. Start us off, David. Tell us what you think about that. It's this topic. Why you chose it. Maybe.
I think that one of the key changes that we see today is the use of AI. I mean, we're seeing that in our day-to-day life. And when we think about the fact that, if we almost 6-7 years ago, we're looking at massive computers that are going to be programming, and in order to run AI, in order to run all of the features that today are built into the camera, we needed to add on massive computer systems. And I recall that we did a project in Boston where they were looking at doing some analytics in order to keep the apartment building safe. And the computer that we needed in order to run those analytics was about $70,000. Today, we're looking at analytics that are being run on the camera. So we see a massive change between the usage of analytics. The biggest problem that I see today, and the biggest area where we see a lot of people having second thought about using it and they're holding off the decision, is facial recognition. And whether you call it facial recognition or facial identification, there's a lot of roadblocks because of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding of what facial recognition is. I've stood in front of a couple of local government hearings in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, where I had to explain to them, and you find it to be very strange because here you are standing in front of elected officials. These elected officials have their own website. Their face is what they are marketing. That's how they market themselves, because in order to be recognized, you recognize the person standing in front of you, not just by the name, but the face. So these people have their own website. They have grass signs. Like when election time comes, you can see their signs with their face everywhere. And yet when they enter a facility, they refuse to have their face as part of a identification method, because in their knowledge is, oh, Big Brother is watching us, they now see us. Well, that's the wrong way to look at facial recognition, because if you choose the right technology, actual facial recognition doesn't include taking a picture. It includes, like everything else, a programmable language. So you're using zeros and ones to create a overall picture of what your face looks like. So our biggest roadblock in terms of being able to address facial recognition is the perception that the end user has. And we're spending a lot of time trying to educate the users. We've run demos before, and one of the product that we looked to use was the Alcatraz facial recognition reader, and we ran demos for the public sector, and we took them to a customer of Alcatraz in order to show them how it works. And yet we still find that when it all boils down to it, they're willing to use their fingerprints as a second mean of authentication, biometric identification. They'll use their eyes, but they are not accepting facial recognition. We've worked through different areas, different markets, and you find it hard to believe, but the government sector is been very slow to adapt. Apartment buildings, especially Section 8 and government sponsored building, they don't want anything to do with facial recognition. Because of some locations, the people that are renting those apartments, they rather stay off the grid. They don't want anybody to be able to track and see where they're going, even though this has nothing to do with it, because they'll use the fob a second later. So we know where they are. It's just a perception, just a conception. And I'm sure that all of these facial recognition companies that are out there are facing the same situation as I am. And I know that they are, because I get calls from them, what can we do to help? But we find that facial recognition has been one of the slower AI features that people are looking to implement.
So when you said zeros and ones earlier, right? These manufacturers, Alcatraz, et cetera, are making this stuff, and people have some fear, as you mentioned, around the acceptance of this. And I wonder how much of those zeros and ones between manufacturers are transferable to actually identify you at scale, right? So meaning, like, does Alcatraz at a different brand have a different algorithm, right? That's not transferable or usable anywhere else outside of that product, or is it? And then they have maybe a possible warranted concern that it could be reused or misused. What are your thoughts?
So they are not transferable. This is where the brain of each one of these products are sitting. So if you want to think about, the whole concept of how they recognize the face, each company does it differently. So you cannot transfer from company A to company B, who both have a facial identification. Each one does it different. There are companies out there that do take a picture of you, which I get why people don't want their picture being taken and kept and stored. Although even those companies don't keep the pictures, for years. They keep updating the database. So the more time you enter the facility, it just saves the last 5, 6, 7 images, how many ever you want, and it keeps updating the system. So if you grow a beard, it will recognize the phases as you grow the beard, and the masks, it learns. But most companies today do not use pictures. They use, like I said, they look at your face, they give the face the characteristics in a computer language. And again, that keeps learning. The systems keep learning to allow you to enter the building or to get access to a certain facility. But once you choose a company, you have to go with that company. It's not like you can take the database, transfer it over to somebody else, and have those the same database being used by somebody else. I will say that there's also other features that AI is really good at, and for the facial recognition. And for example, is the ever learning part of it. So even if you change and you put a mask on or you wear a hat, there are certain softwares out there that are better than the others. I mean, that's how the world goes with everything. But they keep learning as you come into the building. So they keep updating, they keep getting better at identifying you. So later on, when you come with a hat on or when you come with a mask on, they'll know who you are and let you in.
So I'm super curious about the topic, or maybe around legal acceptance, and then around you know just general acceptance. So if I use my facial ID to get on my phone, but that's stored on my phone, right? It lives on the phone itself. But there are aspects where that's branching out into the public. So, for example, I'm outside of Atlanta, so our airport, you have the option to elect into facial ID to pretty much pass the entire line. Even though I might have global TSA pre-check, this is way faster. Even without pre-check, as a non-pre-check user, you can skip the line, and just by accepting that. And so there's some obvious benefits of convenience around that. Also means of entry and access control, like in our business, right, where it's almost totally frictionless. But then there's the legal issue. So I wonder, at those points of convenience, when the user accepts to say, I allow for this, one would think it would remove that legal liability at that point. But how do you get in this industry, when we think about the stuff that we're doing, whether it's at the reader, at the camera, that might be recognizing these things, or any other sensor that might be recognizing these things in our business? How do we get those customers to elect into it, or the buyer that's buying this to agree to say, yeah, I can agree to let my tenants or my students or anyone accept this because we have higher security, more convenience, and therefore reduce my legal liability as a result? Thoughts?
So you brought up a very interesting um point, because border control is one of the places where you see facial recognition being identified very, very broadly. I'll give you an example. When you go into Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, where, as you know, Israel is one of the more secured airports in the world. There's guards standing outside the airport, just scanning you as you walk in. But in Israel, if you have an Israeli passport and if you have certain foreign passports, you can walk in from the plane, get your facial recognition, I would say the kiosk. You present your passport, you stand there, they look at it, they confirm all the information, and you can actually go into Israel without having to talk to anyone. You don't have to go through border control. All you do is you walk in, put your passport, they take a picture of you, and you walk into Israel. Um, the problem that I see here in the US and the implementation is that it's going to get more legal than it is going to be allowed. You brought up another interesting point. A lot of people are not considering the fact that actually Apple has their facial identification. Because I know how everybody's saying Big Brother is watching you, Big Brother is watching you, but Apple has access to your phone. You can technically today, Apple can access your phone and get all your information. People do it anyway. If they have access into your phone, they can pretty much get every information they want from you. And again, people are not aware of this, but if you give me your phone, I can get into every one of your passcodes. There is a place on the iPhone that all your passcodes are stored, and they're not even masked in any way. I can literally see your password. So you left your phone on, I can get your bank passwords, everything that you have.
Oh, note to self, I'm going to keep my phone far away from you when we meet then, right?
Listen, note to self, don't ever log into a public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
When you're in Starbucks or Dunkin' Donut or anywhere else, I would stay off the public Wi-Fi. I rather, even when I go to hotels, I stay off the hotel Wi-Fi and I tether my phone into my computer, and that's how I work. Because I don't have a goal how to hack your phone. So when you go into these public places and they know you're there, I would just stay off the public Wi-Fi. But going back, if you look at the legality of facial recognition, there are currently 3 states that have banned the use of facial recognition, Illinois being one of them. And the Chicago PD actually had a facial recognition software that they were using, and it was banned. So, the way that it's rolling out, the way that it looks like this is projected out, in my eyes, is that I think we're going to run into more issues, legal issues. And I'm sure you're aware of if you're not, or not everybody is aware of the case that a certain basketball arena sued one of the people and kicked one of the people out of the arena because she was a lawyer and she represented somebody against that arena. So, facial recognition is getting to the point where I think instead of using it to improve our security, there are some applications out in the market where the more we use facial recognition, we'll see more legal issues arouse from it.
Yeah, unless we can find some way for acceptance to happen, and then they kind of right. But you can't. I mean, to do that at masses, for example, certain countries that will go unnamed that don't get that approval, right, and that just let it roll out. And so maybe to shift gears on that for a second around bias, potential bias, right? So, obviously I mentioned this last podcast that I had, but, as for our listeners, as you look at AI overall, you have AI as the kind of the umbrella term. Under that, you have machine learning, which an easy example is classification models that if you feed it a bunch of pictures of dogs, it'll know to look for dogs. And then it gets better and makes those predictions on what could be a dog, right? And classifies it as dogs. And then underneath that, you got deep learning, which takes it to the next level of of interpretation. But beyond that, what's been new is what they call Gen AI or generative AI. Some people pronounce it, differently, but generative AI. And in generative AI, there lives bias or otherwise hallucinations that could interpret it differently. And so I wonder, in areas of the world where they haven't gotten that acceptance, if anyone, any manufacturer, especially if they're adopting generative AI, which is a lot cheaper to run, to create than a machine learning model that takes years and lots of samples to incorporate and to grow and get better, generative AI can make those decisions sort of on its own based on the largest data set in the world being the internet primarily, which is how these large language models are based. And so I'm curious, from your understanding, around countries, not naming specific ones, that aren't necessarily getting that wide acceptance because legal issues is not a problem, and how maybe Gen AI is creating bias in that. Now, I don't know whether or not they're using that. The machine algorithms that they create could already have bias built in, right, as it stands. And Gen AI might just be too new, but I'm just kind of curious about that topic overall and get your thoughts.
I think that, look, this is one of the big problems about using facial identification. That is the quote unquote unspoken issues that you see. There is one of the manufacturers of cameras that had AI, and I don't want to get into any manufacturer chasing after me, so I'll just whoever doesn't know it, please call me, I'll give you the details. But they literally identify, using their cameras and their AI, they identify a specific class in their population. So it has been known to do so. But again, when you're looking at places like Cambridge, Mass, San Francisco, Chicago, Oakland, California, the fact that they banned the use of facial ID doesn't have anything to do with identifying a certain class. It's more of a privacy act than anything else. So if you're asking, can you use facial identification to identify certain classes of people, or you can? You absolutely can. But that's part of, we're looking at a police force using facial identification. So I'll give you an example. When you implement, let's say, take the city of Boston, because we know that they're not using facial identification because it was banned in the city of Boston. But if you take the city of Boston and you use facial recognition, and they look at people walking down the street and they identify somebody who has an arrest warrant against them, that kind of use of facial identification is actually a good use, because they take people that are criminals and they use it for finding them and arresting them and bringing them to justice. But that doesn't mean that they're only looking at certain population. No, they're looking at a database of known felons and people that have arrest warrants, and that's how they identify them. If we go back to that equipment manufacturer and we look at what they did, they literally took out a certain population within the mass general public, and they were able to identify it. That's wrong use of facial identification. That's not the purpose why we want to create facial identification. What we want to do is to create a solution that gives you better, faster, easier access into the building, to allow you to have safer environment for you and I, for our kids, for our parents, so they can walk down the street and not have to worry about, shooting and all kinds of other things that are happening today. So I think that the legal issue that we're seeing, or the ability to narrow down facial identification, has to be put for good use. It has to take care of the safety, the security. If we're going and trying to identify a certain group of people within a population, that's just wrong use of AI. And shame on them for even putting that together, because somebody had to sit down and write that code into the system. So that was done with an intent to do it, and that's not a good reason to use AI. And by the way, as a company, we do not use their product. Anybody that can come up with that kinds of a thought process should not be put into schools, public safety buildings, and so forth.
It's good. It's like we all have a responsibility. If we're specifying products, or if we're a manufacturer making products, we're an integrator installing products and servicing products, that it's our collective responsibility to look out for those systems that are biased and to avoid those, and explain to customers why those decisions were made at scale, right, for your business, and why you don't inspect them, right? So I think I would agree with you 100%. I mean, one of the things I want to figure out with this is, how does the industry, or does the industry, create standards around AI facial identification, right? Or what are they doing here, or what do you think they're going to do here?
Um, I don't know exactly where the market is right now regarding the facial identification. I know that local governments, like again the state of Connecticut, for example, that are trying to put together a approved methodology or approved system to allow when and when not to use facial identification. Um, I think that, like everything else, the issue that we have with technology and with the legal system is that by the time the government sits down and talks about it, the items that they're talking about is already light years ahead.
Mhm.
And look at ChatGPT. I mean, they're now talking about the fact whether how to use it, and like, wake up. We've been using it now for the last year, and look at the um, writers in California that are striking because ChatGPT is replacing them in writing speeches and jokes for the night shows, the comedy shows. So I think that we can't wait for the government to come up with the regulation, because by the time they come up with them, it'll be too late. I think organizations within our industry have to come up with some guidelines, the same way that we did with ONVIF.
Mhm.
The same way that we're doing with access control, we OSDP2. Like, we got to come up with some way to regulate and help the government regulate it as well, that it doesn't get abused.
You know, so we got a few minutes left, but I think to that point, I'll say is that not an answer, but more of a ponder or a thought around, to our audience, and maybe for another podcast, is like, how do you regulate something that evolves, and sometimes evolves on its own, right? And so I think that's going to be a tough one. So more to come on that. So Gava, tell the audience, some things you're working on, and where they can find you.
Well, I think that few of the biggest things that we're working on right now are How to make schools safer. We've been pushing certain laws in the markets that we're working on, and be happy to do it in every market. Although we're a little constrained by the manpower, I don't think we can spend that much time with the manpower we have. But basically, our goal is to create safer schools, is to create a better learning experience for the kids. And I would say out of the three markets we're in, schools is one of the bigger markets we're in, and the second one is public safety. And we've gotten to a uh, point where public safety buildings, the fact that we can um, automate their process and allowing the dispatcher to have an easier way, and working also tying it into the school, we're actually able to cut down the initial 6 minutes, the famous 6 minutes of how long does it take to notify the police, down to mere seconds.
Wow.
We're an A&E firm, so we designed that. And again, we take some of that technology and we implement it also in the housing industry that we're in. So those are our top three market. I think that they can find us very easily at www.secureourcity.com, one word. And or you can go on to LinkedIn or anywhere else and look for Secure Our City. Be happy to talk to anybody who's looking to make their schools, their buildings, their police safer, and how to integrate all the systems. Long gone are the days of silos. We no longer have silo between AV and IT and security. They all should be talking to each other, and that's where we specialize, is how to make your system work together to give you better management and safer environments.
Awesome. And where can the audience find you?
They, like I said, one good way is our website, secureourcity.com. Or they can call my cell phone, 508-308-0008, and I'll be happy to talk to them and see how we can help.